I would now like to introduce our keynote speaker, Jilliam Joe. And let me express my deep appreciation for Jilliam and for LEAP as a partner in this work for the field. They've been very generous in sharing and contributing their own research in the work that we did together with the National Landscape Scan using the LEAP framework and their parent and student surveys. So Dr. Jilliam Joe is the Senior Director of Research Design at LEAP Innovations. At LEAP, she provides the psychometric leadership for LEAP's personalized learning, instructional, and leadership competencies and certification initiatives. Jilliam, thank you for being here today, and let me turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much. I am truly honored to be in this room. Many thanks to the Aurora Institute, to you, Susan, to Elliot and team for organizing the meeting and for inviting me. And thank you to the Leon Lowenstein Foundation, my friend Stuart. Thank you so much for sponsoring this meeting. It is so necessary for us to gather together, and I'll just echo, I believe what Susan said or what Stuart said, to collaborate and to build community in this space. These last 7 months have tested us on every front. They have tested the quality of our health, our economy, our humanity, and our hope. However, I'm encouraged by the resilience, determination, and compassion of the human spirit displayed through the workers, or those who are working on the front lines of this pandemic, those who continue to march physically, intellectually, and politically for racial justice and anti-racism, and through our students, families, and educators who are making the best of remote and blended learning. Even now, I know some of you are supporting your children in remote learning as you are tuning into this this conference, this webinar today. So thank you so much. Thank you for everything that you do. I've spent close to 20 years of my professional life serving educators and students, first as a researcher for Norfolk State University's Office of Institutional Effectiveness and Assessment, then an educational testing service where I focused on the measurement challenges related to performance-based assessments, particularly in the teaching effectiveness space. And then as an independent consultant to Ohio's Resident Educator Summative Assessment, and currently as the Senior Director of Research for LEAP Innovations, a Chicago-based nonprofit. Fundamentally, I've devoted my career to understanding and working to mitigate the factors that influence the quality of educational assessments when they're used as opportunity and career gatekeepers. Now, I have to be very honest with you. I'm coming to this space today bearing the weight of my professional identity and the complexities of my identity as a Black woman who has spent more time in spaces that were not designed for me or with me in mind than in spaces that were. In other words, I'm bringing my history with me today, as are you. Perhaps like many of you, I'm also grappling with how to leverage all of who I am in helping the K-12 education field advance and serve young people in more equitable and inclusive ways over the next 5 to 10 years. Please go to the next slide, thank you. So I'm going to pause here for just a moment, and I want to take a poll of the audience. During your research and quantitative methods courses, how many of you were prompted to reflect on how your identity and privilege influence your research practices? So I want you to type yes in the chat box if that is true of you, that you were prompted to reflect on identity and privilege and how those factors influence. Yeah, there we go. That's what I thought. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I had the great fortune of getting some of that in my qualitative courses. Thank you all for your honesty. I had the privilege of getting some of that in my qualitative courses, but like you, not so much in my quantitative research methods courses. So during my doctoral program, I learned how to account for race in my research, and we examine interesting problems like stereotype threat and test taker motivation among African Americans as ways to explain differences or gaps among test taker performance. But as the only Black student in my cohort, I cannot recall engaging with my all-white faculty members and peers in authentic conversations about whiteness, privilege, and power, and how they influence Black and Brown students' learning and testing experiences. And looking back on that time, I see it as a critical missed opportunity in the education of researchers who would go on to influence education policy and practice. Arguably, there isn't a more opportune time than now to study personalized learning and to have the hard but necessary conversations about its intersection with racism, class, and systemic differences in America's classrooms. One of the key questions that we are tasked with answering as we build the evidence base for personalized learning is, does the practice help to create more equitable and inclusive environments that honors every child's identity and bolsters their social and cognitive development? Moreover, do these practices help to close the opportunity gap between white, Black, and Brown children? Next slide, please. So personalized learning provides us with, I think, a useful philosophical framework for approaching research on personalized learning, research that truly has an equity and inclusion lens, or that's done through an equity inclusion lens. One of the tenets of personalized learning is that every learner is unique in their academic and social and emotional needs, interests, and strengths. We see this as evidence of this variability within and across classrooms in a school. And to the left of the screen, I'm showing you 6 classrooms, 1 school, practicing personalized learning. And there's a variability in incoming academic performance and end of year growth. And so I believe, and we believe at LEAP, that it is imperative for us to, as researchers, to support educators in personalizing practices across 30 children, 25 plus children in the classroom who have such a diversity of strengths and interests and needs. Next slide, please. So if we are to use personalized learning as a philosophical framework for our research, then we have to probe the empirical space for cases that where personalized learning works, right? And also for cases where the theoretical model doesn't fit, or cases that defy the theoretical model. So really probing the edges of personalized learning. So the question is, for whom does personalized learning not work, and for whom does personalized learning work, and why? There's always this why question that we have to continue to pursue in our research efforts. If we ignore or omit these cases, next slide, please. If we ignore or omit these cases or transform our data in such a way as to make these cases common with the rest of our data set, then we run the risk of painting an inauthentic narrative about personalized learning. And I know that none of us do this, like none of us drop outliers, but it has been done. It has been done. And I believe that, again, it is inauthentic, especially as we're building the evidence base, to not understand who those outliers are and what they represent in terms of context and experience, their history. Next slide, please. Thank you. So LEAP brought together a panel of researchers and practitioners from institutions and organizations across the nation to review the LEAP learning framework. During one of the whole group discussions, the subject of agency and culture came up. Several of the panelists pressed us to consider how our Western orientation of agency might play out in communities where children are not encouraged to be heard or make the physical space serve them. Up until that point, I never imagined the conflict that a child might experience to be empowered in one space and diminished in another. Conversations like the one we had that day continue to challenge my assumptions and about how I expect children and adults will show up in the research that I lead. And if we aren't careful to monitor and challenge those assumptions that we oftentimes bring to the space, no matter how objective or impartial we try to be, we run the risk of creating a narrative that reinforces stereotypical beliefs about who can and cannot own their learning. And so what I suppose I'm doing is I'm advocating for a more holistic approach to our research that integrates the what and the why, the quantitative and qualitative inputs. Next slide, please. Thank you. So at LEAP, we collaborated with our research advisory board to sketch out a potential pathway for the next 5 years of our research. The pathway advances from exploratory and descriptive research to more rigorous hypothesis testing. You'll notice that across each of the 3 stages, there is the integration of empirical research with life stories. At 2:15 this afternoon, just a plug, my colleague Emily Bader will share with you how we have used life or impact stories to help illustrate the evidence of change in our schools more vividly. Now, because we are a nonprofit and are accountable to our funders to provide evidence of impact, we've spent most of our time in our research energy in stage 3 of this pathway, examining the causal relationship between our intervention on educators' teaching practices, their implementation of personalized learning in the classroom, and student academic outcomes in ELA and math. So after 6 years, we have promising evidence that personalized instruction is helping students achieve their goals and meet grade level standards. What we have seen most consistently through our programs is that teachers are making the shift from teacher-centered pedagogy, what we might define as traditional teaching, where instruction is directed by and owned by the teacher, to more learner-centered practices, where you start to see more collaboration between teacher and students, even within lower grades. Yes, the kindergartners can do it too. Teachers who engage in this work have observed statistically and practically significant gains in their students' literacy and math skills, gains that surpass their students' peers. In the second cohort of LEAP's Elevate program, which combines learner-centered instruction and ed tech with a plan for whole school redesign, students in the program show gains of 7 percentile points in literacy and 12.5 percentile points in math, as measured by NWEA, relative to a comparable control group. For the fourth cohort of our 18-month program, we saw an impact on truancy behavior in middle school students. For the sample of students in the study, learner-centered instruction reduced the likelihood of an unexcused absence by 48% relative to their peers. I am pretty proud of the work that our team of professional learning experts and educators and students have done in these classrooms across the last 6 or so years. Really incredible work. And I'm pretty sure that, what we represent, there are pockets of this evidence, as Stuart mentioned, in other areas. And so now we have to tell the story. Next slide, please. So we are in a very unique space this year. There's a dearth of student outcomes data, at least we expect there to be this year. And what that gives us is the opportunity to focus more on stage 1 research. And so what we have proposed to do, along with other organizations, actually we've joined forces with NGLC, and hopefully we'll be able to kick off a larger project, but LEAP is executing a research project that is focused on really deconstructing the deficit narrative that has shrouded African-American school communities, particularly with respect to remote learning and the success or lack thereof of remote learning. And so what we want to be able to do is probe our exemplar schools, the schools that we've worked with, the schools that have gone deep in personalized learning, and elevate the innovation and the work that teachers, school leaders, students, and their family members, their network, are doing to uphold, to buoy students, and to ensure that this year is as successful as possible for these students. And so we don't want to paint an all rosy picture, because we know it's not all rosy. We know that there are still needs and gaps in this space. But what we want to be able to do through this largely qualitative study is to paint a more comprehensive picture of what is happening in remote learning and the role that personalized learning is playing in that. Next slide, please. I promise I'm going to wrap it up pretty soon. So here's our call to action as researchers. We have to aim to be seen as authentically adding to our storehouse of knowledge and perception about every child's ability and potential in this space. And what we have to do is not only honor the history that our school communities are bringing to the research space, but we have to honor our own history and interrogate what we are bringing to the space. Next slide, please. So here's how we do that. Again, we interrogate our beliefs, assumptions, and biases. I think that we have to engage in critical conversations about racism, equity, diversity, and inclusion as a research community. We can't just observe it, because we are a part of this, right? So we have to talk about it. We have to communicate about it, especially in this personalized learning space, where it's just so there's so much potential here for personalized learning to upend historical systemic issues in our school that has created these gaps in academic performance among racial and ethnic groups. We have to reject deficit mindsets about the communities that we're studying. It's important for us to probe, like, what is the mindset I'm bringing to this research space right now about this community. We have to acknowledge our position of power and privilege, work collaboratively, and share power with communities. So I said, personalized learning is the perfect paradigm or philosophical framework for the work we do. Learner-led. How are we allowing the communities that we're studying to lead us to their truth? How are we sharing power with these communities in our research? How are we working collaboratively with them? So the same thing that our professional learning teams, our teachers are doing in the classroom, we have to adopt as researchers. And then finally, we have to commit to telling their story with empathy, especially this year. I think that researchers, we have the opportunity to be great storytellers this year. Of course, not diminishing the rigor or the scientific nature of our work, but really working very hard to allow the voice of our community to speak, of our students and parents and teachers, to really speak to the phenomena or the challenges that they're facing authentically. Next slide, please. That's it. Thank you so much for all the work that you all are doing this year. I'm so excited to hear more about how everyone is pivoting, what evidence you all have found in this space. And I'm really grateful to lock arms with you in this work. Thank you again, Susan and Elliot, for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the day.
Jillian, thank you so much. Thanks for leading us through that opening and framing to help set the table for our space today as we examine the research and look at personalized learning for inclusion for all, where all means all. Just focusing on the mindset we come in and the asset framing and our purpose. So thank you again for a wonderful opening. And now I'm going to turn it over to Elliot to move into the research highlights so we can learn more together. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. And thank you so much, Jilliam and Stuart and Susan. I was imagining all the applause we would have been hearing if we were all in the same room, but we'll have to imagine. And I know it's there. And thanks so much for those remarks to put us in a great mind frame for the rest of today's convening.